Hey fam, welcome to Big Brother and the Hodling Company, a podcast about music and Web3 and trying to fend off Big Brother. I'm McKeegan Boyce. Today I spoke with Jamie Reddington, an artist and builder who operates under the moniker Sound of Fractures. The North London native is also a co-founder of the collective Wild Awake, a music project focused on building scenes that uses Web3 technology. We're talking about the importance of creating scenes, reorienting our mindset around music's inherent value, and growing a project by speaking with people, one by one. Hope you all enjoyed the conversation. Here we go. Hey Jamie, it's great to have you here.
Hey.
So yeah, me and Jamie just learned that we're basically neighbors, both living in Hackney, which is pretty cool.
It's not very common in this kind of world.
Yeah, indeed. As usual with these things, I like to start at the beginning and just get a sense of who you are, where you're from, and when your relationship with music started, and then work our way forward from there.
Big question. I guess, the easy part is I'm from London. I'm born and raised in London. I've always been here. But my music relationship, both my parents worked in music, at least until I was young, and then they moved into other things. So another person who grew up in a household, of music and always wanted to work in music, despite my parents telling me never to work in music. I'm the only one in my family that didn't listen and ended up doing music. I've always played instruments. I guess I never really found my place, right? Like I played in bands. I played different instruments growing up, and then as a sort of late teens, I kind of found my home in the form of a sampler. A friend of mine was a friend of mine's brother was a drum bass producer, and we used to sit in the room while he made beats and play PlayStation. And
Cool.
that was how it started, right? Like we used to make beats. At the time there wasn't many people, because we made indie music to start with, playing guitars and making beats, and because of that we stood out a little bit back then. And me and a very close friend of mine were like a production duo, and we made hip hop. That was our thing, man. Like we just made rap music for years. Like that was kind of how it all started for me. And got pulled into pop music for a while, did that for quite a long time. And I guess over that period, the main story was just that it just felt like it wasn't for me. Like I made a lot of music that never came out. I found that quite hard. My friends still do it. They're very successful, but it just didn't suit the way that I made music. I was quite emotionally involved in the process and the output. And just started to feel very disconnected from it, right? Like you write 300 songs a year, maybe a couple of them come out, and that's successful, right? Like a couple of them come out and do well, then that's great, And it's very draining. It's very intensive. It's very like networking heavy. And yeah, I kind of did everything from different angles. I like developed artists. I was signed as a writer, producer. I was signed as an artist at one point in time. And just kind of reached burnout. That's the short version of the story, right? Is that just, there was a period in time where there was health problems that I had due to sort of being in the studio all the time. I guess like mental stress. I didn't really know it at the time, but that kind of, as a producer, it's really hard. Like, you wake up, you start ideas, the person comes, you work on them, they leave, you edit the vocals, you mix down a demo, you send it off, you make new ideas for the next day. And when it's going well, it's super exciting, right? But when you've done it a lot, it's a lot. So I kind of came out of it thinking about like, what am I in this for? And how do I refocus that? A lot of life things happened. I had a little girl, lockdown
Congrats.
happened. Thank you. All around that time, and I started to kind of ask those questions of like, what am I doing this for? If it's not really exciting and fun,
Right.
why? What's the point? So I started Sound of Fractures. I'd been making music in the side a lot. A lot of my friends were always like, when are you going to do your own project? And that's when it started. I had some downtime. I was lucky to have made some records and some stuff for TV and bits and bobs that were kind of helping my life tick over. And I just cancelled everything and started doing the Sound of Fractures stuff, and found some other ways to make work, right? Like I do a bit of lecturing a couple of days a week. I do some stuff for TV and film, and that kind of allowed me to have like 2, 3 days a week just for the music I love, and that's been the journey of the last 2 years.
Hmm. Cool. Thank you for sharing. I'm curious, going back to your parents' advice of don't get involved in this industry. I'm curious, like what their jobs were, what their their advice to you was, and how often you thought about that during some of the more difficult times where you weren't necessarily finding enjoyment in the work that you were doing in music.
It's been hugely influential for different reasons, right? Like my mum was working at Island Records, which is kind of the
Mm.
story that I've learned over time, right? Like I wasn't really aware of it when I was young, but my mum was working at Island Records, which at that time was an incredible place, right? You know, she was head of international, I think, when she quit, but she quit
Cool.
when I was 2 years old, and she quit because she wasn't seeing me enough, right? And when I speak to her about it now, we're always like, "How did you quit that job?" And she's just like, it wasn't compatible, and I wanted to see you guys, right? Like I couldn't get home before 7, 8 o'clock. There was an expectation to be at concerts, to be around, and I wanted to be present. And she quit that and started a little business from home. Um, and that's been a big factor in the last few years for me because it really, that's been massive for my life, right? Like her being present for me, and giving up something that everyone covets so much, um, which I'm sure, she still thinks about what would happen if I didn't quit that job.
Right.
While my dad carried on working in the industry, and he was a radio plugger, in a different world to what I did, right? So it didn't really have any like benefits to me other than that I had that like privileged advantage of like understanding the language of the music industry rather than
Mm.
like actual contacts that benefited me in any way. But like I went to concerts, he got free CDs. I used to go to the office when I was a kid. Um, and that just kind of gives you that kind of tool set to understand how to navigate it, I guess. But as a radio plugger, my dad came from a generation where he just wanted to be a radio plugger, and that was what he did, and that's what he was great at, and that's what he loved. And the industry changed, and the industry expects you to then become the head of radio, and
Mm.
then or start your own company, or move up. And if you don't do those things, then that demand for like young people um pushes you out the door. And he had a lot of jobs, which is just normal for the music industry, right? Like he
Right.
moved around a
Right.
lot of places. But for as a family, like my mum and my dad my dad was constantly in and out of work. There was periods where once he broke his leg, like he was out, he couldn't walk for a long time, and my mum had to work 2 jobs to make up the money, and that was the background of them being like more just like don't trust the music industry, right? Like
Right.
it's not a stable place for you to build a life, like they're not looking out for you, right? Like as soon as they're done with you, they'll drop you, I guess,
Right.
which
Right.
is true in many ways.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a capricious place.
The infamous they, right? But it's the same in all creative
Yeah.
industries. Yeah,
Yeah. We are also part of the they, I guess, in,
yeah.
in in a way. It's just sort of this giant no-name monster. I mean, how true is that, Ben? Since you've just had, a child, and are you thinking about these things like, your mom making decisions about her career? It's like in order to see more of you and like the industry that you can't trust as terrible they. Are you thinking about these things in the context of what is now your nuclear family?
Every day. Yeah,
Mm.
every day. I mean, even doing the Sound of Fracture stuff, and especially the Web3 stuff, being present
Hmm.
and showing up and
Right.
maintaining, maintaining your presence in these kind of like scenes and spaces is a lot of work in itself, right? And
Right.
it's when you're excited about it too, right? You just find it hard to switch that button off at the end of the day. Your phone's right there. It's, complicated. It's also why I started, I took this role doing something that I still love, right? Like speaking about music and helping young people build careers in music, around music, I like to say, rather than in it, because I'm not sure what in it means anymore. But
Yeah.
that highlights it even more, right? Because I'm around all these young people who are just starting out on their journey, and I'm very aware. It feels like a big weight of responsibility from someone who's been through so many ups and downs to sort of,
Right.
you know, it's very easy to be a YouTuber where you can sell the dream, right? And sort of be like, get
Yeah.
streams this way or do these things. But we know that that doesn't actually build a career, especially not like one that can last more 3 to 4 or 5 years. We don't know that yet, but we don't, we haven't seen much evidence of that, and it's getting harder and harder. So yeah, I think about it a lot. It's why I maintain these other things in my life. And I think they also empower me to build a project that can keep growing for the next 5, 10 years. Like I look at people like Fortet and think,
Hmm.
you know, that's or Bonobo, or people that are kind of like build sustainable careers that maybe the trajectory wasn't super fast at the beginning, but it's, that's what I'm interested in, like
Hmm.
music being a part of my life for a long period of time, rather than burning out in the first bit.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I think about, a lot the importance of, being resilient in, in this space. And I mean, I have to wake up every morning and just be like, just keep going.
Yeah,
Because it really does require that level of commitment, that level of energy, and going through a lot of bullshit along the way to hopefully get to a point of sustainability where you can put
right,
in a little less effort and time and energy and be more selective in the things that you do, the music that you make, the projects that you're
right,
involved in. That's sort of the goal, right?
right. I mean, that's a lot of what the work that I'm doing at the moment is about, right? It's like trying to deconstruct and rethink about like what music as an experience is for creators and listeners and everyone, right? Like, I'm interested in experimenting around like the value we get from the experience and how we think differently about those
Hmm.
things, right? When the numbers go up, that's great, but I don't know if that is like, we're still so early into like technology and even streaming, right? Like it's still not providing the sustainable kind of system that
Hmm.
the amount of people who want to make music can do. And maybe, and arguably maybe it shouldn't, right? Because not everybody can do this thing. But if
Right.
not everybody can do this thing, like why are we only talking about what it is possible for 1% of people to do? Why aren't we thinking more about how this thing can be more universal and more enjoyable and more long term and more beneficial and gratifying for more people? And I'm really interested in that idea.
Yeah, it's a really interesting take. And it's like this is also something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and because it's easy, this is like a statistic that I use a lot, in my writing. This kind of 1% of people, within the streaming paradigm are able to make a career out
Hmm.
of their music. But it's 1% of not just the people who are invested in their careers as musicians. It includes like all the hobbyists who are also
Sure.
putting their music on places like Spotify, like that. One of the things that's come with the ease of access to digital audio workstations, digital distributions. Like anybody can put anything online onto a place like
Right.
Spotify very, very quickly. Um, the issue is that every piece of music is treated the same way, regardless of how much
Right.
effort you put into that music.
Well, we plug it into this like concept, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everything's plugged into this single concept of what this thing is and
Mm-hmm.
what that creates. I mean, the reality is just too many people can create music, right? Like, and that's okay, but just too many people to be able to sustain careers. But I think that the issue isn't that. The issue is the approach, right? Is the expectations. And if I think what I talk about with my friend Martin, who you've spoken to before, who
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing a lot of work with at the moment from
Mm-hmm.
Music X and Auto Music Academy and things,
Mm-hmm.
is building like ecosystems around musicians. Like it can be small ecosystem, right? It could be a
Mm-hmm.
few people contributing to your career, helping you build something, or getting something from the relationship they have with you as an artist through their love of music. And
Mm-hmm.
I haven't quite figured it out yet, but like when I'm around like young people, I am thinking a lot about changing the language, right? Because people are focused on this singular thing of like what brings you success, and that thing of success might be 1 million streams, right? It might be 10 million streams, but even that isn't sustainable, right? To 10 million streams, I mean, let's say if you do 1 million streams a month after tax, it's not even minimum wage. It's not enough to live in London, and you've got to do 1 million streams a month, 12 months a year for like 60 years. You know, like, is that really realistic? Obviously,
Yeah.
you can sell merch, you can do gigs, you can do all these different things,
Hmm.
but I think that singular focus on this thing has to come first and the rest follows
Right.
is harming everyone's sort of experience of music, you know, being a part of music.
Yeah. I agree. It's sort of the end all be all. It's either, your streaming metrics or like your follower metrics on places like Instagram or TikTok. And when that becomes the end all be all, it's just a race to the bottom. And
It is, but it's safe. That's something I've realized recently,
yeah.
trying to sort of bring new artists onto using the blockchain, is that it's there's a list of things to do. You can do it, you can feel like this thing could happen any minute. It's like gambling,
Hmm.
right? Like you
Right.
feel like this thing is always just like one decision away, one piece of luck away, one person away from turning round. And
Hmm.
you have this system and you go through the routine and you do it every release. And the end product of that is like you usually get to a point where you just walk away from it or you fall out of love with it. And
Hmm.
that is something that, yeah, I think people, we need to talk about a lot more earlier on in people's exploration of music, is that, you know, I do know people who've had that 5 years of glory and bought a house, right? And invested money and had a lovely life for a long time, but they still have to build a new life after that. It's like footballers, right? You know, like the career is not long, right? These people have to go and do something afterwards. So
Right.
um, yeah, I think that is really interesting, and I also think why it's like I'm really interested in collectives and communities and belonging to things, because the thing can have its own life and last, and you can come in and out of it. You don't have to be present for it the whole time.
Right. I think this is a good segue to talk about Wild Awake. Because I'm really interested in this project, and in general this sort of exploration of how do we empower niche in a way that is can be templatized, can be brought to some type of relative scale that people can tap into.
Right.
Like I was talking to someone the other day about this idea of like what what is like the independent cafe, like what does shopping local look like on the internet.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's obviously possible. We do this in the real world. Like people buy things from Amazon, but there are small independent stores in your neighborhood that continue to
Yeah.
thrive and do interesting things. And there's a lot of things involved with that, whether it's
Yeah.
your connection to the people there, the stories, whatever it may be that
Yeah.
resonates with you. So how do we get that to the internet? And I
Right.
feel like Wild Awake is a cool experiment that is pursuing a world like that. So I'd love to hear if first if you could introduce the project and just talk a little bit about what you're doing.
Sure. So Wild Awake we describe as a scene building experiment. We describe it as many things because in a way it's like a vehicle to experiment with many things, like a digital home for people who share a love of, like alternative electronic music, which is kind of the world that I, you know, exist in. Um, and I guess it has a simple mission to start out with, which is that we're onboarding artists, we're supporting them in that process. We're bringing, people who love music and collectors and just anyone who's interested to be a part of that journey and go through that journey together to sort of experiment with what that process feels like. We we're kind of combining all the things that we find interesting into this idea, and that includes bringing value to music. Like we believe music should hold value, and that is very hard to do in the systems that people are used to using, the current streaming model.
Hmm.
um and I think that's, the easy thing to do is to slam Spotify, but that that experience isn't a great user experience other than it serves you stuff, right? But it's not a very emotional experience, and we can do better, right? And I think that we're trying to experiment with what that can be. But there are limitations with the technology, but we are building out this community around bringing these artists on chain, sharing music, sharing experiences, and I guess at the heart of the concept is this idea that Wild Awake as a meme, like that word is felt uncomfortable to me a lot at first, but like it now it feels like it makes more sense, can carry some of the burden for everybody. Like I missed, the birth of some of my favorite labels. Like, I don't know, like, I reference Ninja Tune a lot and XL and places that definitely have like a ethos and identity without having like a single lane sonically. And I think that is really interesting to me. And I missed all that. And I think it's most people did, and most people continue to because of the way the world fits together. And I'm interested in how we can create something that's cool and has like cultural value with people and do it together. And, I believe that people will, when they discover it, will want to be a part of that. And in doing so, we can empower artists, we can help people who want to support artists feel more connected to the process. And this thing, this meme, Wild Awake, discovering and exploring things together, I think can carry some of the burden. People can dip in, they can dip out, new artists can come in. It can do different things, right? It could curate club nights, it could curate a gallery, it could be a DAO, it could be I don't know, it could have a treasury and do grants. I don't know the list goes on because I don't think we should be limited. I mean, people like to say it's a Web3 label, which on the very surface, it can look like that. And I don't have a massive issue with that, but that's not how we refer to it. We don't take any income from the artists. We are just growing with them and experimenting with them and trying to bring people in around that. And a Web3 label is an interesting way to start a conversation because then I can explain why it's not that. But we do need a framework that people understand, and people understand that. So that's kind of,
Yeah.
whenever I talk about it, I try to think about like how I can better articulate the different things that it encapsulates. And we have a mirror page where Martin leads the writing a lot of the time based on our ideas. And we try to do that often because it's a thought experiment and it's a real experiment. And all the things we talked about with streaming was making me think about it, right? Because loneliness is the other thing we talk about a lot, is this kind of experience of throwing things online, following the rules, not getting anything back, being a listener and just going to that black page of Spotify
Right.
and being served things in a way they control and data in a way they control. And I think we're getting tired of that. I think everyone's getting a bit tired of that, or losing interest might be the more realistic way to talk about it. And I don't believe that's a good thing. So
I
we're
agree.
interested in exploring what's an alternative, I guess.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love the open-ended nature of it as well, as I guess is, it's an experiment, and you want to allow the contours of that experiment to kind of take their natural course. Um, but at this point, you've started to release a couple things through Wild Awake with a couple different artists, and I'm curious to hear how that experience has been, both for you and Martin as kind of the people who are enabling this project, and as well as for those artists, and if through these initial releases you've started to like has that affected your vision for what Wild Awake can and will eventually become?
I think it's like an ebb and flow, right? I mean, firstly, it's kind of grown. It was an idea that was kind of in my head that I discussed with Martin, which, he became a part of it. And, I talked about it to some platforms and some people because I was looking for some support to try and experiment with this idea. And Token Tracks, a company in the UK, have been really supportive and helped us kind of build it. Our friend Kat Bassett, who is part of Water and Music, has also come on board to help us. And then we've got to this point now where we're starting to put the music out. And I think I've never onboarded people who haven't come to the blockchain when they're ready. And that has been a really eye-opening experience of their own accord. You know, like I've been coming to people and saying, look, just give me a moment here. I'm going to tell you about this thing. And that's been really eye-opening because it really reminds you how complex and confusing so much of it is, especially when you're used to just like one single way of doing things. So that's been the first like challenge for us. It's like, oh, okay, right, like we have to really take our time here. We have to be careful and caring, and we have to like build trust, and we have to trust them to like, you know, experiment in their own way in their own time, and they have to trust us because we're just saying, yeah, just do this thing, like you'll get it as you do it.
Hmm.
Which some of the elements you have to do, you know, like I need you just to go and make a wallet. This is how you do it. And then we're going to get online together. We're going to talk about it. And we realized we couldn't do it through guides. We had to be face to face on chats, and we had to do it
Right.
together. And and I think that's what we wanted to do, right? Learn as a community, or as a group. And that has been the first step. I think phase two has been, how do you find people that might be interested in this thing?
Mm.
Right, in the mess of the internet and the mess of competing narratives, which is one of the hardest things with the blockchain, right? Is
Sure.
that you're in this big mess of competing narratives, and you're communicating through platforms that are built to reward certain narratives, you know, like
Hmm.
algorithmically.
Right.
Which I'm trying to like, I was going to write down what I just said, because that's kind of what the problem is, right? Is that, you know, I don't know what the word is, but like clickbait or
Mm.
like hot takes is
Hmm.
what the system is set up to reward, right? Because
Right.
it's set up to
Right.
reward interaction and debate and
Mm.
arguments, because that's what makes people snap out of their scrolling.
Hmm.
So you're kind of competing against all that stuff, and when you're just trying to build something that you feel has like genuine intentions and value, that is harder to communicate than you would expect, because it doesn't have the same ring to it as this person just made the equivalent of 1 million streams, right?
Yeah.
Which is good. It's good news, but you know, and each to each their own. But we haven't wanted that to be our approach.
Hmm.
So I think that's kind of the ongoing challenge. It will be the ongoing challenge. I mean, Martin recently coined a line that we're using all the time, which is that all we're asking for you as someone in this community is to get one more person excited about Wild Awake.
Mm.
And that's really focused me back in again on
Mm.
just like that's it,
Hmm.
right? Like I want to make you feel something. And we had a listening party 3 weeks ago for all the
Mm.
people in the group, where the artists talked about their journey a bit and their experience of starting this journey, and played their music and talked about their music. And it was genuinely emotional. Like I felt myself almost like welling up at times, because it
Mm.
was people talking about the thing they love, with other people in the room listening, excited about it. We were talking to each other's faces. And after that, it was before we'd done anything on, you know, put anything open to collect. It was just, I was like, that's it. That was it. That's the thing that we're trying to capture.
Mm.
It would be an amazing thing to do if we can bring value to some of these musicians' experience by like introducing them, helping them find people that value their work and help support them.
Hmm.
But the human connection is really at the center of it, and everything else kind of, I hope, will come next.
Yeah. That's really beautiful to hear, and I'm happy that you had that connective moment. I agree. I mean, you know, the emotional narrative, the emotional connection is really the core of everything. Once you have that, then you can build and cultivate that in all kinds of different directions.
Right.
You know.
If I can get people in the room to feel that, then it's the same as hearing a record you love, right? But you have to draw them into the space long enough to have that moment where they're like, you know, where they fall in love with the song or fall in love with the project.
I mean, this is such a necessary evolution. I think in the space that we're in, I think people have known for a long time that the industry as it is not sustainable, and it's not built to support these this type of connection. I think about this conversation I had with this experimental guitarist Elliot Sharp. It was during, the early days of the pandemic, and just, sort of commiserating about like the loss of public spaces and being able to be together. And he talked about the importance of public spaces, as a means of connection, and this idea of, um, you have to be in the same space. I mean, in this case, it can be digital as well, but like, he took it a step further to like being in these shared spaces. And there's like this certain sort of chemical mixing, and he called it a pheromonal handshake
Right.
of like actual, there's something that needs to happen to connect with somebody.
We don't have record shops and stuff anymore, right? Like I
Right,
used to go
right.
to a place called like Black Market Records in London when I was too young to be out in London on my own. And I remember just like the feeling of that place, right? Like it's like all these people that are like my idols buying records and listening to music together, and the energy. And those places still exist, but like
Mm,
we are maybe disconnected more from them. We find them harder to find. There is definitely, not as many. When you were talking about that, there's a great book by Emma Warren called Make Some Space, and it's
mm.
about a place in Hackney that
Huh.
was a venue where for experimental jazz. And they still do things, but it's an amazing book about this venue that became this like cultural hub for like a whole movement. And I think when we were talking about Wild Awake, we were talking a lot about the creation of scenes, right? Where it's not a music collective. It's not five people trying to build a music career bouncing off each other. It's a shared experience through like a love or an ethos or a belief. And that's what brings people together. It can be accountants, it can be bar managers, it can be, anyone, photographers, artists, just anyone, people who love music. The people that we need to reach are not like fitting in these cool musician boxes, right? That's not who I'm trying to reach. I'm trying to reach my friends. I'm trying to reach just anyone who loves music, right? And I want to break down that idea of like the people who are seen as valuable in like music, they're the people we really need. They get overlooked, right? They don't get the feeling that they deserve from the investment they make into music. And maybe that's why they invest less money in music, because they're not presented with things that feel like worthy and I don't know, like bring value to their lives. They would rather, like we said, go and spend £4 on a coffee at the posh coffee shop down the road that does vegan pastries that cost £4. And yet people will still be like, oh, $10 for a music NFT, that's crazy,
Yeah,
right? But they'll
yeah.
spend that every day on, stuff they don't need.
Hmm.
Or, whatever we spend a month on Amazon Prime and Netflix and Apple and Disney and newspapers and Substacks, and they're all things of value, right? But for some reason, music has fallen by the wayside, and vinyl has kind of been an argument for why it shouldn't do. But
Hmm.
vinyl costs a lot of money for musicians to make, and it's physical and it's big and it's complex and it takes a long time and you need upfront money and it's a big investment. And the blockchain is offering different solutions, and there are other great things. Bandcamp is great. There are other platforms, right? But they are still not artist owned. And
Yeah.
we should have at least one set of tools in this big matrix of tools that is something that we have more ownership over, more control over, and that we can put more value in, and people can't take away from us.
I agree. Yeah, it feels like music has just been sort of co-opted into this platformization that has just, flattened everything. Um, and there's a general, again, in the same conversation where I mentioned the, what does like the indie cafe experience of the internet look like? It's like we're going to shop at the same five stores, every day. We go to Google, we go to Amazon, it's like the same thing as going to Walmart essentially, and we're
Sure.
doing that every day. And music has been flattened into this the same kind of experience. And
It doesn't matter, right? Like it's become like a background service,
yeah,
and I don't think it really feels like that to a lot of people because they still find things they connect with, but it's harder for them to find those things. When they do find those things, they drift away from them quickly because there's no real like, I don't know, there's no like real like way to anchor yourself to something. Or maybe it's that thing you talked about like that pheromonal connection, but there's no like there's no kind of sense of belonging, and that is just a byproduct of many changes, but that's just, you know, where we're at. It's harder to forge that feeling of belonging and connection because of the way we consume everything in our lives. And the best way to do that is, it seems what we found is, our strongest tool is word of mouth, is to try and create this for the people here. And I'm hoping it won't be all on us, you know, like I'm trying to encourage anyone to come forward with ideas of how we can build and how we can adapt and what we can do. And it will only work if people start to do that. And if we can't create an environment that, or foster an environment, I should say, like that makes people feel they want to do that, then we're not doing it right.
mm,
And I guess that's, yeah, I guess having these conversations makes you realize things, right? You have to have these face-to-face conversations to work through these ideas. And it's kind of how it was all born, right? It was me and Martin talking. And before that, for my project, I've got a really amazing group of people who become my friends that I met through them collecting my music, and having
mm,
conversations like this with
cool.
them about ideas I'd had led me to releasing music the way that I did on Chain. And I'm trying to stick with that. But it's hard in the noise, right? You know, you still get someone with, you know, 4,000 mints, and that just takes over because all of a sudden people are like, it's a lifeboat. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
lifeboat because so many people in the ecosystem rely on VC capital to pay their bills. So it's
Mm-hmm.
understandable. It's not it's totally understandable. The same way that people vilify A&R people. My friends are A&R people. They're just
Mm-hmm.
people who love music, who've
Yeah.
worked for 20 years, sacrificed everything to get a job near the thing they love.
Mm.
And, you know, they don't walk out the door and sign loads of stuff they love. That's not how it works, right?
Right.
They have to put food on the table, and they have to please the people in the system. And I think it's the same. I think understanding and keeping at the forefront of your mind that everyone on the other end of everything is a human being, right?
Right.
Like trying to build a thing. And maybe that's why Wild Awake can be different, because it has flexibility. It's not a platform, right? It doesn't have to exist in one place. It doesn't have to
Mm-hmm.
serve one type of person. And I'm hoping that it allows it to be a place where people can come from all these different worlds and congregate through, you know, their passion, without there being these kind of tension points. But, you know, at the end of the day, it still has to hit markers for people to care. You know,
Right.
things selling, people being what matters to me is that the artists get things out of it, and that it grows and it allows more people to be able to do that. But, you know, we live in a capitalist society, and we have to, you know, speak the language sometimes, even when we don't want to. Or we
Mm-hmm.
try really hard not to. You know, we go against the grain as often as we possibly can, because I just think you have to be different, and there's many things out there already doing it a certain way, and I hope that that leaves space for us to do it our way. And I still use lots of platforms. I have friends in these places and the ecosystem, and the more that they grow, the better, the more space it makes for things. I say things a lot because I don't know the word, but like
Things that
new
work.
things, places, locate digital locations. We use that word quite a lot, right? Like a digital home, right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, I think that don't hate the player, you hate the game comes to mind. Is like,
yeah,
I think it's a really important reminder that we live in a system that is its own machine and has its own machinations that, like, at the individual level we can't really do anything to to affect. But through intention and like this an intention as Wild Awake is doing this kind of intentional pushback and sort of a reorientation of what success looks like. I think is really important too because it's so ingrained in us to think about success in these very standard metrics of um, user growth and revenue over certain periods of time. I mean, we could continue to abstract this further and further across the layers. You brought up like the VC capital, and I know once you get on the VC train, it's very hard to leave. But I think projects like this that are trying to be a bridge to something else, to a different way of being. I love the intentionality of not uh, using explicitly capitalistic language. I think that feels important.
It's a
Just measuring
hard thing to find
progress.
in different ways, right? Like when
Yeah.
you were talking about it, it made me think it's almost like the trust thing. We just did a piece about trust. I think that's huge because it's almost like therapy in the sense it's like when the artists start talking about how hard it's been in the current climate, you can see this like weight lifted off them. That I'm saying
Mm,
this out loud to other people that are agreeing. And by saying this, it's not like an admissal of defeat, right? It's not like an admission that this isn't going to work. It's
right.
okay to say this and it can still work and this can still be a part of my life. And I can say this out loud. And I think a space to like have that and be yourself and have those conversations and talk about these things is increasingly more what it's become.
Mm,
Like it that's kind of the bond at the moment is that we've said these things out loud, almost like a group therapy session.
mm,
Web3 is a little bit like that, right? A lot of musicians
sure.
coming in being like, that
Yeah.
thing was horrible. Like, I don't necessarily think that it's the holy grail and it's in the kind of the go-to clickbait forms that are often presented,
Mm,
but hopefully it will be. Who knows? I don't have clear answers, but like you say, if we can create this space or this thing, this vehicle, this home, then that will feel way more rewarding even than sometimes just doing my own music, right?
mm.
It has life in it and more value to me. And yeah, I hope we can continue to build and grow and find people who want to support it and be a part of it.
Yeah, me too. I will reiterate as I said earlier, keep going.
Help
uh,
someone for just one person. That's
yeah,
all you need to do. Help
that's
one
a
person
great
discover the idea and talk to them about it. And
right.
that's a huge piece of progress for us, right? If that someone feels confident enough just to say, if you're interested in this, check out this thing. Um,
Hmm.
that's kind of what we're asking of people.
Yeah. Uh, and that feels within reach, feels accessible, and that feels like a good moment uh, of hope to leave things on. I just have one more question for
Go for
you
it.
that I ask everybody at the end of these. You're going to a desert island. You get to bring 3 records with you. What are they?
Oh man, you put me on the spot right at the end there.
I know.
I can go with just like just I mean I go with simple classics sometimes that I know just like every track
Hmm,
is a solid for me. The easy ones are the ones that go way back, right? There's probably lots of
sure.
current music that I would take with me that I'm forgetting, but um, Axis Bold of Love by Jimi Hendrix is like a record that has a lot of
Nice.
emotional value to me because I've discovered it through my mother, um, her love of Jimi Hendrix. And again, I always think of Talking Book by Stevie Wonder because that's a
Hmm,
record that I discovered through my dad.
hmm,
Um, and contemporary records, do you know what? I would probably have to put a Frank Ocean record in there.
nice.
Um, which one is just really hard, but I'll just go with the beginning, which was Nostalgia Ultra,
Hmm,
for me. Which strangely, there's no electronic music records in there in that selection. I've just realized, but
huh,
to me, like electronic music pulls from all those places,
sure.
and they are records that I always go that stay in my memory for having every single track having like a meaning to me.
Mm.
And I'll probably think of like 5 more after we finish and say,
Well, yeah, that's sort of the point. It's
yeah,
it's an impossible question, but I think
sure.
I think you picked a good trio. Some good vibes on your island. um, yeah, cool, Jamie. Well, this has been a really really great conversation, and yeah, I mean, really appreciate you being here. Before we take off, for the people listening, what's the best way for them, to follow along or get involved with what you're doing?
I guess the most active place is Twitter at the moment, but you can find me at SO Fractures, so short for Sound of Fractures, and Wild Awake World, which is the Wild Awake pages. And just DM me. That's how we're starting it. Have a conversation, DM me, say hello, come and join the Wild Awake community, collect an artist piece of work, support an artist. Yeah, come and support musicians, come and help us build something different, have one less coffee a week, and come and be a part of something meaningful.
Cool. Yeah, go do it. And yeah, thanks again, Jamie. It's been really great. Wishing you the best of luck as you continue to build out this community, one person, one conversation at a time.
Right. Thanks so much, man.
Absolutely. Take care. All right, that's it for this episode of Big Brother and the Hodling Company. I'm your host, McKeegan Voice, and you can keep up with me and all the latest Web3 music trends on Twitter at McKeegan. That's MACEAGON. This show is a production of Decential Media, and you can visit us at decential.io, and remember, only you can prevent and fend off Big Brother.